Janet sat in a rocking chair, cradling her newborn daughter, Angela, in her arms. Angela's soft breaths and tiny coos filled Janet with a sense of peace she had never known before. The world seemed brighter, more hopeful now that Angela was in it. Janet smiled down at her baby, brushing a stray curl from Angela's forehead. "Just you and me," she whispered softly, kissing Angela's forehead. Raising Angela on her own had been difficult, but it didn't matter. Janet's life had always felt incomplete. She had grown up without a mother, abandoned by Loveth at a young age, and had spent most of her life searching for the love and warmth that had always seemed just out of reach. But now, with Angela in her arms, Janet felt whole. Angela was her entire world, and Janet had promised herself that she would do whatever it took to give her daughter the love she had never received. That afternoon, Janet decided to take Angela to the mall to buy her some new clothes. The weather was perfect, bright and sunny, with a slight breeze ruffling the leaves on the trees outside. Janet dressed Angela in a tiny pink outfit, smiling at how adorable she looked. "You're going to be the best-dressed little girl in the whole world," Janet said as she buckled Angela into her car seat. The mall was bustling with activity as people hurried in and out of stores, their bags filled with new purchases. Janet felt a sense of normalcy as she pushed Angela in her stroller, weaving through the crowds of shoppers. It had been a long time since she'd had the chance to enjoy a simple day out like this. Being a single mother wasn't easy, but Janet had never been happier. Angela was everything she had dreamed of, and their bond felt unbreakable. After picking out a few outfits for Angela, Janet made her way to the parking lot. She was still smiling as she strapped Angela back into her car seat, thinking about how cute Angela would look in her new clothes. The world felt calm and safe, like nothing could ever go wrong. But just as Janet was about to climb into the driver's seat, she heard the screech of tires. A police car pulled up beside her, its engine rumbling as two officers stepped out. Janet's heart skipped a beat. The two men looked serious, stern even. One of them, a tall man with sharp features, approached her. His name tag read Officer Ben. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," Officer Ben said in a cold, authoritative tone. Janet froze, her hand resting on the car door. A shiver ran down her spine. Why were they here? What did they want? She looked at Angela, who was blissfully unaware of the sudden tension in the air, her tiny hands waving in the air. Is something wrong?" Janet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt a knot of fear beginning to form in her stomach. "We've received a report," Officer Ben said, glancing at his partner. "It claims that you are an unfit mother." Janet's eyes widened in shock. "What? That's not true. I love my baby more than anything in the world." Officer Ben didn't seem to care about her protests. His eyes were cold, unfeeling. "I'm afraid we have no choice but to take the child into custody." The words hit Janet like a punch to the gut. Her heart raced, and her vision blurred as panic set in. "No, you can't take her. She's my daughter," Janet cried, her voice trembling as she clutched the edge of the car door, shielding Angela from the officers. Her hand shook as she instinctively moved closer to her baby. "Ma'am, step away from the child," Officer Ben said firmly, taking a step closer. "No," Janet screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You can't take her away from me." Officer Ben's partner moved toward the car, but Janet quickly positioned herself between them and Angela, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't let them take her baby. Angela was all she had. "Please, don't do this," Janet begged, her eyes filling with tears. "She's my baby. I haven't done anything wrong." But Officer Ben's expression remained hard. "Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll be forced to take action." Janet's mind was spinning. How could this be happening? She had done everything right, had loved Angela with every fiber of her being. This couldn't be real. It felt like a nightmare. But the cold reality was sinking in. These men were here to take Angela, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. No, "No, please," Janet screamed as Officer Ben lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her away from the car. She struggled, her body trembling with fear as she fought to hold onto Angela. But despite her pleas and cries, Officer Ben was stronger. With one swift motion, he ripped Angela from Janet's arms. Janet fell to the ground, her knees hitting the pavement hard as she screamed in terror. "Angela, no, please, don't take her." Her voice was raw, her heart shattered as she watched Officer Ben carry her baby away. Angela's small, frightened cries pierced the air, but there was nothing Janet could do. People in the parking lot had stopped to watch, their faces filled with confusion and unease, but no one stepped in to help. They simply stood there, staring as the officers carried Angela to their car. Janet scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking as she tried to chase after them. "Angela, please," she sobbed, but the police car had already started moving, the engine roaring as it sped away. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she ran after the car, her arms outstretched. But it was no use. The car disappeared into the distance, taking Angela with it. Janet collapsed in the middle of the parking lot, her body trembling with shock and grief. The world around her spun as she knelt on the asphalt, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Angela was gone. They had taken her baby. She was left alone, helpless and shattered, with nothing but the echoes of her own screams filling the empty air. For days after Angela was taken, Janet barely moved. Her once warm and lively apartment felt cold and lifeless. The baby clothes she had picked out for Angela still lay neatly folded on the bed, untouched since that terrible day. Janet spent most of her time crying, her body racked with sobs that seemed to have no end. Every room, every object reminded her of Angela's absence. The silence was unbearable. But after days of grieving, something inside Janet shifted. She knew she couldn't keep falling apart like this. Angela was out there, somewhere, and Janet was determined to get her back. No one would care about her daughter as much as she did, and she couldn't rely on anyone else. She wiped her tears and stood up. Her love for Angela ignited a fierce resolve within her. She would fight for her baby, no matter the cost. Her first step was to go to the police station. Surely there had been some mistake. They would help her, she thought, as she walked into the precinct with hope mixed with desperation. Janet stood in front of the officer at the desk, her hands trembling. "My baby was taken," she said, her voice cracking. "Officer Ben, he took her. You have to help me." The officer behind the desk frowned as if he didn't understand. "There's no record of that here, Mom," he said, flipping through some files. "No baby has been reported missing under your name." Janet's heart sank. But it happened. She protested, her voice rising with panic, right in the parking lot of the mall. "There were witnesses. You can't just say she's not missing." The officer sighed, clearly growing impatient. "Ma'am, without any official report or proof, there's nothing we can do. You should calm down and calm down." Janet's voice cracked as she cut him off. "My baby is gone." "What do you mean you can't do anything?" Tears brimmed in her eyes again, but she swallowed them back, her frustration boiling over. She turned and stormed out of the station. As she stood outside, the truth hit her like a tidal wave. The police weren't going to help her. No one was. For reasons she couldn't understand, Angela's abduction was being swept under the rug. She felt invisible, like her cries for help didn't matter to anyone. Some people even suggested she had imagined the whole thing, that the stress of being a single mother had caused her to break down. But Janet knew what had happened. She had seen Officer Ben's cold, unforgiving eyes as he ripped her baby away. Determined not to give up, Janet decided to start her own investigation. She returned to the mall, hoping to find someone, anyone, who might have seen what happened that day. She spent hours speaking to people, desperate for a clue. Most of them had seen nothing or were too busy to care. But then she met Jake, a young man sitting on a bench near the parking lot. "I was here that day," Jake said, his voice low as he looked around nervously. "I saw the cops take your baby. I didn't know what to do. It all happened so fast." Janet's heart leaped. "You saw it? You saw them take Angela?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Jake nodded, looking uneasy. "Yeah, I did. But listen, I've seen Officer Ben around before. He's involved in some weird stuff. There's been talk about him, about kids going missing. I don't know the whole story, but it's not the first time something like this has happened." Janet's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Angela. Officer Ben had taken other children too. But why? What was going on? She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Thanking Jake, Janet hurried home and immediately began researching everything she could about Officer Ben. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she searched through news reports and local forums. Hours passed as she uncovered a disturbing pattern. Officer Ben's name was linked to several other cases of missing children, all of which had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. No one had ever been held accountable, and it seemed as if each case had been quietly closed without further investigation. As Janet dug deeper, a sense of dread washed over her. Something much darker was at play here. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Janet hesitated before answering. "Stop asking questions," a distorted voice said coldly, "or you'll regret it." The call ended abruptly, leaving Janet trembling with fear. Whoever was behind this didn't want her finding out the truth. But despite the chilling threat, Janet refused to back down. If anything, the warning only made her more determined. She wouldn't let fear stop her from finding Angela. The next day, she set out to find other mothers whose children had gone missing under similar circumstances. After hours of searching, she finally tracked down a woman who had lost her child in the same way a few years ago. But when Janet approached her, the woman's face turned pale, and she shook her head violently. I can't talk about it," the woman whispered, her voice shaking with terror. "Please, just leave me alone. They're always watching." Janet's heart sank. Fear had silenced everyone who might have been able to help her. She was on her own, walking through a labyrinth of secrets with no clear way out. The weight of her confusion and fear grew heavier with each passing day, but she refused to give up. Angela was out there, and Janet would stop at nothing to bring her home. One evening, as Janet walked back to her apartment, she noticed a car driving slowly behind her. Her heart began to race. Was it them? Were they watching her now? She quickened her pace, her mind spinning with terror. The car sped up, staying close behind her. Janet's pulse pounded in her ears as she broke into a run, the cold grip of fear tightening around her. Whoever took Angela wasn't finished with her yet. The next morning, after a sleepless night filled with nightmares of Angela crying out for her, Janet stood in front of the mirror. Her face was pale, and dark circles ringed her eyes. But the fear and uncertainty that had held her back were slowly being replaced by something stronger: determination. Her heart raced, and her hands trembled, but she knew she had to do this. She had to confront Officer Ben and demand the truth. Janet grabbed her coat and hurried out of her apartment, her mind swirling with a mix of fear and anger. How could the police do this? How could they take her baby and act like nothing had happened? The image of Officer Ben's cold, indifferent eyes as he took Angela haunted her every moment. But today, she wasn't going to be scared. Today, she was going to get answers. As she approached the police station, her heart began to pound harder. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, but she pushed through the fear. She couldn't back down now. Not after everything. Janet entered the station, her eyes scanning the room until she spotted Officer Ben standing near the front desk, talking casually with a colleague. Without waiting, Janet marched up to him, her voice filled with the anger that had been building for days. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and fury. Officer Ben looked at her, his face blank and unreadable. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about," he said calmly, as if he had no idea who she was. Janet's hands clenched into fists. "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "You took Angela. You took my baby right out of my arms. How can you stand here and pretend like it never happened?" Officer Ben glanced around the station as if worried someone might be listening. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down. You don't want to make a scene here." Janet's fury boiled over. "I don't care about making a scene," she shouted. "I care about my daughter. Where is she?" For a moment, Officer Ben's face remained impassive. But then something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt? Fear? Janet couldn't tell. But it was enough to make her press harder. "Tell me where Angela is," she said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please." And then, unexpectedly, Officer Ben's facade crumbled. His hand shook slightly, and his face paled. He looked around again, making sure no one was watching, before motioning Janet to follow him. Confused but determined, Janet followed Officer Ben down a quiet hallway, away from the main area of the station. When they were alone, Officer Ben's cold demeanor broke. He slumped against the wall, his face drained of color. "I didn't want to take her," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I had no choice." Janet stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Why did you take Angela?" Officer Ben rubbed his face with his hands, clearly struggling with his words. There's a group," he said finally. "A powerful organization called the Council. They take children from mothers like you, mothers who they think can't provide for their kids, and they give them to wealthy families who can't have children. They say they're saving the kids." Janet felt like the floor had fallen out from under her. Her legs felt weak, and her heart raced as she processed what Officer Ben was saying. "What do you mean, mothers like me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What makes them think I'm unfit to be a mother?" Officer Ben looked down, unable to meet her eyes. "They watch you. They decide. It's not up to me. I just follow orders." Janet's breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. "You're telling me some secret group just takes children away from their mothers because they think they know better?" Officer Ben nodded, his face filled with regret. "They have connections everywhere, in the government, in the police force. They're untouchable." Janet's head was spinning. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. And then, Officer Ben dropped the biggest bombshell of all. "One of the leaders of the council is Loveth," he said quietly, looking at Janet with haunted eyes. Janet's world froze. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "My mother, my own mother is behind this." Officer Ben nodded. "Loveth is one of the ones who decides which children get taken. She thought you couldn't provide a good life for Angela. That's why she took her." Janet felt like the air had been knocked out of her. Her mother, who had abandoned her as a child, was the one responsible for taking Angela away. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Janet had ever felt. How could Loveth, the woman who had left her all those years ago, now be responsible for destroying her life again? Tears filled Janet's eyes, but her anger quickly overpowered her grief. "I don't believe this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "My mother took Angela because she thinks I'm unfit. How could she do this to me? How could she?" Officer Ben looked at Janet with sympathy. "She thinks she's helping. She believes she's saving these children from lives of hardship. But you know the truth, don't you? She's wrong. She was wrong to take your daughter." Janet's mind was spinning, a mix of disbelief, rage, and confusion. Her own mother, the woman who had abandoned her, was now taking her daughter away for the same twisted reasons. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "What do I do?" Janet whispered, her voice cracking. "How do I stop her?" Officer Ben looked at her gravely. "I'll help you," he said quietly. "But you need to know, going against the council is dangerous. They don't like loose ends. If we go after them, they'll come after you." Janet's heart pounded in her chest. She knew the risks. But there was no way she was going to let the council, or her mother, get away with taking Angela. She would fight with everything. She had to get her daughter back. With fierce determination in her eyes, Janet looked at Officer Ben and nodded. "I don't care how dangerous it is. I'll do whatever it takes to get Angela back." The stakes were higher than ever. But Janet knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop until she had her daughter in her arms again. Janet knew she had no choice. She could not let the council keep Angela. Her love for her daughter fueled her determination every day. She had tried following the rules, seeking help, but no one could be trusted anymore. Now, it was up to her. With Officer Ben's assistance, she formulated a risky plan to rescue Angela. The danger was immense, and failure could mean never seeing her daughter again. But there was no turning back. One night, after meticulous planning, Janet and Officer Ben snuck into a secret meeting of the council. The room was dimly lit, and the air was thick with tension. Janet hid behind a curtain, her heart hammering in her chest, as she listened to the chilling conversation. The council members discussed Angela's adoption, finalizing plans to hand her over to a wealthy family. Janet's pulse quickened. Time was running out. She was about to slip away when she felt a cold hand grab her arm. Janet gasped and spun around, finding herself face to face with Loveth, her mother. Loveth's eyes, filled with a mix of guilt and resolve, pierced through her. "I knew you'd come," Loveth said, her voice low but firm. "You don't understand, Janet. Angela will have a better life with them. They can give her everything you can't." Janet's anger flared. "You think money makes a family," she hissed, keeping her voice low but sharp. "You left me when I was just a child, and now you want to steal my daughter. I won't let you do this." Loveth's face softened, torn between her misguided sense of duty and the pain she had caused her own daughter. Tears stung Janet's eyes, but they were tears of anger and heartbreak. "You don't understand what love is. Love isn't about money or status. Love is about being there, no matter what. I will not let you take her away from me. You made that mistake with me, and I won't let you do it to Angela." Loveth's hand shook, her defenses cracking under the weight of Janet's fierce determination. But just as it seemed like Loveth might relent, her face hardened again. "You don't know how dangerous this is, Janet," Loveth warned. "The council is bigger than you think. They have powerful people in the government, people who can make you disappear. If you try to fight them, they'll come after you, and Angela will never be safe." Janet's breath caught in her throat. This was worse than she had imagined. Loveth's words hit her like a cold wave. This wasn't just a matter of fighting for her daughter. The council's reach was vast, and the risk was far greater than she had anticipated. She started to question everything, even Officer Ben's loyalty. Could he really be trusted, or was he just another pawn in their game? Confused and feeling betrayed, Janet slipped away from the confrontation, her heart racing as she hurried down the hallway. But as she reached the parking lot, 2 security guards blocked her path. One of them smirked, recognizing her. "We've been watching you," he growled. "You need to walk away from this now." Janet's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to turn back, but her love for Angela pushed her forward. There was no walking away. Angela was out there, waiting for her. With a surge of courage, Janet stepped past them, her mind racing as she devised her next move. Realizing that she could trust no one but herself, Janet came up with a new, daring plan. She tracked down the wealthy family set to adopt Angela. Their mansion was heavily guarded, but Janet had no other option. One dark, silent night, she sneaked onto the property, her heart racing as she slipped through the shadows. The risk was enormous, but she had to get to Angela. Inside the mansion, Janet found Angela in a beautifully decorated nursery, her daughter's small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Tears filled Janet's eyes as she reached for her daughter, her heart swelling with relief. She scooped Angela into her arms, ready to flee. But as Janet turned to leave, she was caught by the family. Her heart leaped into her throat. fearing the worst. The adoptive mother, a tall woman with tired eyes, stepped forward. "Please don't run," she whispered. Janet froze, clutching Angela tightly. To her shock, the woman's voice softened. "I didn't want to take her. They blackmailed us. I was going to return her to you. I swear." Janet stared in disbelief. You were going to give her back?" The woman nodded, tears in her own eyes. "The council has threatened my family. I couldn't fight them, but I don't want to keep your daughter. Please, take her and go." In an unexpected twist, this unlikely ally helped Janet and Angela escape the mansion safely, guiding them through the security systems and out into the night. With the adoptive mother's help, Janet exposed the council's dark secrets. The public outcry was overwhelming, and the organization crumbled under the weight of its crimes. Loveth, finally realizing the terrible consequences of her actions, surrendered herself and worked with Janet to bring down the council from within. Their relationship was still fractured, but there was hope for healing. Finally, Janet and Angela were reunited. The battle had left scars, emotional and physical, but Janet knew one thing: her love for Angela had won. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, mother and daughter, stronger than ever. Thank you for watching this emotional story. Please subscribe to support this transformative journey through storytelling.